Turn up your volume. Because you're about to listen to The Sick Podcast. Draft Digest. The sickest NFL draft and scouting podcast. It's gonna be sick.
And welcome in to another edition of the Sick Podcast Draft Digest. I'm John Vogel. Host today, Emily is out. She's on vacation. I received word in the group chat that her sister got engaged yesterday. So congratulations to everybody in the family. Congratulations to Emily's sister. And hopefully they are having a great time on this vacation. In the meantime, we got some NFL scouting stuff to dive into because it's currently the dead season of football, which means outside of UFL and the CFL now just kicking off, American football for the most part is shut down. The UFL season is just concluded. We don't spend a lot of time on that here. But what I did want to get into is I wanted to continue on the positional breakdowns that we like to kind of go over in the off season and kind of readjust to the new tendencies and the different things that have come along in the game of football really since the last time that we did this last year. So today I wanted to focus on a couple positions that a lot of people consider dying. I want to focus one on the offense and one on the defense. And dying is a term that we love to use in the media. We love to be dramatic. We talked about, for years previous to this, as football had kind of evolved into 3 wide receiver sets and heavy passing games having to become the key components to a great offense to score points, how the running back position was sort of quote unquote dying. It was becoming devalued in the grand scheme of looking at the NFL picture of roster building. So going to take some time and look at the running back position and kind of see some of the things that are changing there. Then I also want to take a little bit of position on the defensive side. The linebacker position is also in this sort of phase that a lot of media people, I've been asked about it on a couple of radio shows here recently. If the linebacker position is becoming devalued. And so that's something I want to dive into. So let's get into the running back position here. As I started to get into, the running back is kind of went through a devaluation phase where, there were a lot of people, there were a lot of draft analysts and stuff in the media talking about never to draft a running back in the first round. There wasn't a lot of money being put into the running back position. Still, comparatively speaking to other positions, there still isn't. But it is becoming a valuable part of an NFL roster. You have to have a good running game. So let's kind of break down the evolution a little bit and how we got there. So, when I was growing up, and I think some of you guys were growing up, you can go back into the 80s and 90s, the 2000s. There's always several star running backs that absolutely dominated the league. Walter Payton in the 70s and into the 80s with the Chicago Bears comes to mind. Eric Dickerson with the Rams, I think, finished out his career with the Colts. Emmitt Smith, Barry Sanders in the 90s. And in the 2000s, you had a few hitters here and there. Curtis Martin, I remember, was really big at one point. He had a couple of really good years in the late 90s and early 2000s. And then Frank Gore comes along and Adrian Peterson comes along. And what we kind of saw is that as we got into the later 2010s, there weren't those bell cow running backs anymore that sort of brought all this, the star power to the league. And people weren't paying a lot of money to get running backs either. What people started to notice with the trend, this is right around 2015, 2016, was that teams were drafting running backs as opposed to re-signing their veterans. And so as we kind of look at the broader picture of building a roster, the reason for that is because the running backs take a lot of hits. Their bodies cannot handle the type of contact that they're going to have to taking 350 carries a year. So you want to break it up into several bodies, break up the workload. And so nobody wants to put a lot of money into their first running back because that if that guy goes down with an injury, it's one of the positions that gets hurt the most. Uh, you're going to have the more dead money locked into your injured reserve. So that was another thing that was kind of brought to my attention is how are the running backs able to handle this in the 80s and 90s, the early 2000s? Well, look at the defenders. Back in the 70s, when you had Mean Joe Green, he was 6 foot, 275 pounds as a defensive tackle, and he was one of the biggest dudes that played on the interior anywhere. 275 at defensive tackle usually doesn't work anymore. Unless you are a very special athlete and where you have some special skill set. Even Aaron Donald was 285, most of 290, most of his career. So your typical defensive tackle is 300 pounds. The defensive ends, you look at Lawrence Taylor, who absolutely was a dominating force in the NFL. He was 6'3", 235 pounds, which is a good-sized inside linebacker. And then we're asking, can he play pass coverage today in the modern NFL? Most of your edge rushers now are right around 260, 265. So the body types for these defenders have completely evolved into bigger, more athletic types of defenders, and the running back position hasn't evolved with them. And I think I've made this point. I may have made this point last year in the offseason. If you look at Derrick Henry, he's one of the only running backs that you can think of in the last 15 years that's been able to handle the carries, handle the workload that he has, and is still doing it today. And he's 6'3", 250 pounds. So he, as a running back, evolved with the defenders and their growth and how they got bigger. Most of these other running backs aren't built like Derrick Henry. In fact, there isn't a running back that's built like Derrick Henry. So bringing the point back together that the running back position has stayed put in terms of the evolution and the body type, the defenders have not. So that's what's ultimately led to running backs getting their workload split up. Now, we also saw this whole phase really in the last 5 years where there wasn't a lot of running going on in the league. In fact, there was a all-time low, I think in 2022, of run attempts in the league. Obviously the passing game really wasn't the forward pass wasn't really invented till the 30s or the 40s. So the running game has always been such an important component of football, and for the first time in its evolution, it was almost a non-factor. It was being used less than it ever had been. So this led to defenses going and moving everybody into a base nickel, taking a linebacker off the field and putting an additional defensive back on the field. So with that evolution, because now the box got lighter, you don't have as many run defenders playing in the box, you see this sort of change where now you have more opportunities to run the football. And so people started doing it. And that's what we saw the last couple of years is, oh, wow, there's all-time, average yards per carry going on across the league. Well, clearly it's because the boxes are not loaded. So that kind of brings everything together to why the running back position is, quote unquote, making a comeback. Saquon Barkley this year with the Philadelphia Eagles absolutely had a fantastic year. Derrick Henry did as well. Several key running backs played on several teams in the NFL this year. Bijan Robinson, Josh Jacobs, so on and so forth. And these guys were critical to their team finding success oftentimes. So that's essentially where the running back position is started to make that's why it's started to make its comeback. Now, that being said, the capabilities to be a great running back, to be worthy of a first round pick, have somewhat shifted. If you look at the last couple guys that went in the first round as running backs, not counting this year, guys that have already been and played in the league, you have to look at Jamar Gibbs with the Detroit Lions, and you have to look at Bijan Robinson with the Falcons. Both of these guys are very electric runners. Bijan's got a little more power to his game, but he's also an electric, explosive athlete. Both are excellent receivers. out of the backfield. And this kind of gets into my next point. The running receiver is the new trend that we're going to start seeing across the NFL. We started talking about it last year, especially after we had Mark Gorsak on, former Pittsburgh Steelers scout. The running receiver is really bringing, is going to be the next big thing. And so when you kind of think about that, what does that mean? Okay, that's a guy that is basically a running back that can run routes like a wide receiver. There are wide receivers that play to this skill set, and there are running backs that play to the skill set. Christian McCaffrey is a very good example of a running receiver. That guy can run routes from outside, out of the slot, out of the backfield, and be an effective runner between the tackles. That is a really good example of a running receiver. Gibbs fits that. Bijan fits that. Saquon fits that. And it's an even bigger bonus when you can also pass protect as well. You look at a guy like Blake Corum, who went in the second round to the Rams a couple years ago. There were a lot of people that were surprised by that, but that's because when you put on the tape, Blake Corum, he can catch out of the backfield. He's an electric runner between the tackles, and despite his lack of size, he can pass protect very well. So that's essentially the skill set that you're looking for at the running back position, and you can mix and match if they don't have all those skill sets. You want to build a running back room that has guys that maybe can do two or three of those things, two of those three things. And then you mix and match them based on your personnel, and it kind of changes the way that you scheme a little bit. But that's where you're seeing the trend going to first round running backs. They have to be able to do all three of those things. And running routes as a receiver is very key to this. The average running back currently, one of the things I've been doing as well is I've been going through the data, is going through every player that's in the league, pulling all that data, and essentially building the current average at the position. And the current running back average height is 5'10" and a half, 213 pounds. 4.55 40 is the average now. 35.5-inch vertical. 10-1 broad is in a 1.59 10-yard split. So those are the key. That's average across out of everybody that's currently on a roster in the league. So basically, you have to be fast. On top of that, the explosive part comes in there with the 35.5-inch vertical. And the more that you can do to your skill set, the better. There haven't been outside of just the running receiver, there hasn't been a lot of changes. I don't think that you'll necessarily see a lot change in how you evaluate the position, but that is a key. I think that's a key thing to look at when you're looking at guys this year, when you're watching them and evaluating them, is can they fill that role? Can I put them in the slot? Can I have them run route? I have them do all these different things. So those are the key factors here. The running back position is probably plateaued in terms of what it's going to be able to do from how much these guys are getting compensated in contracts. Saquon this year, he kind of hit the top. I think he's at 17 or 18 million a year. That's pretty much the key here. I think is you're not going to see anybody really push that. People aren't really going to want to, especially with the money that keeps rising for the wide receiver and the quarterback positions and the defensive line, your pass rushers, your offensive tackles, your offensive line. All these are getting pushed. Running back probably stays put. You can take top money if you are, that running receiver type. And I think that's what you're going to see these guys getting paid. That's what they're going to be. Will they be the running receivers? Your traditional running backs will probably settle down your top end right around 10 million a year. So that's about what I'm expecting there. So that's the running back position. There's not too much to note on. The reason that I wanted to get into the linebackers too, because I knew that there wasn't so much to explore necessarily with that position group. But the reason I wanted to get into the linebackers is because this is a position that I've been on a couple different radio shows the last couple weeks, and people have asked me about this consistently. If the linebacker position out of the running back position, passing games and all these things, is that dying? And I think the answer is kind of twofold. I think that it's partially, you could say it is, uh, but it's not. It's always going to be a necessity to your defense. Typically your middle linebacker is the guy that's making all the calls. He's reading the offense. He's going with he's taking his instincts. He's studying more. He understands the defense. He's essentially the quarterback of the defense. And so that may end up becoming something that gets split between a couple people. But I don't think that the linebacker position is necessarily going anywhere, nor is it dying. It's that it is in the phase of evolution. That's one of the beautiful things about football, in my opinion, is the game always evolves. Because it always evolves, there's always room for change. There's room to explore, to try new things, to use different skill sets. And then when somebody hits on something that, a skill set that's kind of outside of the norm and it works very well, you see everyone else in the league try to find that type of skill set. So it's kind of a fun little cat and mouse game that you get to watch. The thing I think that you have to note about where this position is evolving at the moment is very much like the running back position. You have to be able to do a lot of different things. You look at the linebackers being split. Used to have 3 on the field usually. And you're talking in a 4-3 defense. Now you're going down to 2. And if you're in a 3-4 defense, you probably had like a third guy, or you have 4. One guy's a straight up pass rusher, another guy's kind of a hybrid pass rusher, and maybe more of a linebacker type. He's coming off the field now, so that's the kind of change in those 2 different schemes. So the Mike position, the middle linebacker, is kind of in this weird spot where it's going to be split in half. And you see a lot of teams doing this where because they've gone down to 2 linebackers, they kind of split the field in half and each linebacker plays one half of the field. They play the holes, the run gaps, they make the reads and calls, they react to the zone coverages there, but that's really what you're seeing. That being said, they really have to be bigger now, but not too big, if that makes sense. You have to go, if you look at the early 2000s, we had Brian Urlacher, linebackers that came downhill. They filled run gaps. They were nasty against the run. They were physical. They were gritty and grimy. Those guys are pretty much in the past. In fact, we have one that if he'd been playing 15 years ago, he might be a real star in the league, and that's KJ Britt, who I think is on his 3rd team in 4 years. He's a great downhill run plugger. He's got the size. He's 6'1", 245, and he can't play pass coverage worth a lick. That's the key right now at this position. Can you play zone coverage? Can you play man coverage against tight ends? Not just running backs out of the backfield now, but tight ends down the field. You look at player like Jack Campbell was a guy who went first round a couple of years ago. A lot of people were really upset about it, but he had the frame, 6'5", 235 pounds. That's perfect for the inside linebacker now. And he had the athletic ability to play coverage and had the strength to come downhill and plug run gaps when he has to. So the linebacker position isn't necessarily dying at the moment. It's just it's going through its phase of evolution where now we demand more out of the position because of how the offenses have evolved. So defenses are countering that. So big, that's kind of the first thing here. Some of these undersized linebackers, they definitely carve a role in the NFL. What I mean by undersized, 6 foot, 6'1", 5'11". Though that's on the small side of the spectrum now at this position. They can fill a role, but your typical linebacker, your prototype guy, you want to be 6'3", 6'4", 235, 240, and be able to move. They're going to essentially play almost like a safety at times, like a box safety. That's essentially what your linebackers are now. So you want them to be able to tackle in space. You want them to pursue extremely well. They have to do those things in order to be successful in the NFL. Some of the other things I think that you want to look at when you're evaluating these guys is, first off, just get an idea for what is their strength like. Do they have the ability to take on blocks? Are they washed out when they engage with offensive linemen, especially inside guards and stuff? What kind of lateral ability do they have? This is key because that plays into coverage. It plays into, range. If they have some lateral explosion and they can move laterally from side to side, they change direction. Well, those are some things to look for. How well do they play in space? This is kind of becoming, I noticed when I was watching the NFL this year, this is critical to every position outside of the defensive line. How well do you play in space? And if you can't play in space, you're going to have a really hard time in the NFL. So what do we mean by that? You are one-on-one with the ball carrier. There's no one else around. It's you and him are going to make the stop consistently. How are you going to make the stop? Smaller guys typically dive at legs and try to trip up the guy. Are you a wrap-up tackler? Do you control the tackle? Or are you giving up yardage while you're trying to make the stop? So those are critical components. Space defending is huge. Being able to be that consistent guy that's going to make that stop in space. And then blitz ability. Believe it or not, if you have the ability to time your gap again as a blitzer so that you can kind of avoid the offensive line and avoid the protection and get back there on the quarterback, that's a key component as well. There are guys that's essentially what they can do. James Houston comes to mind. I know I'm bringing up a lot of lines in this episode, but it's kind of a necessity. James Houston for the Lions, that's exactly how they used him. He's a blitzer. He played specialty downs, and on third down, he knew how to time up his rush, and he got 6 or 7 sacks the first year that he played with them. So blitz ability is something to keep an eye on, and it's definitely, you could carve a role if that's your niche, but it is something that you want to have at the position. Play recognition and concept knowledge is probably the hardest thing to evaluate. I think that one of the best ways to kind of figure it out is if you're watching a guy and he's consistently in the right place at the right time, there's a reason for it. Don't overthink it. If he just, every single time that the run comes through, he's in the run gap, he's plugging the hole, very, very rarely not there doing it. It's because he's watched a lot of tape. It's because he understands what the offense that he's going up against is, and he knows how to beat it. Very critical keys to the linebacker position. So play recognition, you want to watch that against the run and against the pass too. How well does he recognize concepts that are being brought at him? That's also critical. So those kinds of, concept knowledge, play recognition kind of goes together. But I think the slight difference being that with concept knowledge, he reads the blocking scheme, he sees the guard pulling, and he already knows it's a trap play, or he sees the tight end pull, he knows it's a split play, and he knows where to go because of where the run's going to end up going when that play is called. That would be play recognition. Concept knowledge would be more of the guy drops into coverage and he reads the levels concept. The tight end running the 5-yard end in front of him, he knows that there's going to be a 12 or 15-yard end behind him, and he sets up for it. So those are the little keys I think that you want to look for. The last thing at the linebacker position I personally put in the notes is natural instincts and consistency. Now, I think you could argue that it's very similar to play recognition and concept knowledge, but there are some guys, I like to call them gypsies, but they're instinctive because they're just everywhere. It doesn't matter if it's a run, doesn't matter if it's a pass. And so I want to kind of measure through, 3, 4, 5, 6 games, however many games I end up watching, how consistently he shows those instincts. Maybe the play doesn't necessarily dictate. It doesn't really show where exactly it's going to go. But he sniffs it out, or maybe he understands how a specific player that he's going up against will try to put a certain set of moves on him, and he reacts to it. Those are things that you could pick up on tape, and you can say, hey, I've seen Ashton Genty, pull this move off when he goes into this specific gap. And this is where his first go-to move is typically his little stutter and jump cut. So if a linebacker is reacting to that the first time he sees them, that'd be instinct. And that goes into those little finer details of the game. So overall, the linebacker position it's sort of in a growing phase, right? So linebackers are getting longer. Right now, your average linebacker is 6'2", and he's 235 pounds. He's running a 1.62, 1.63, 10-yard split. His 40-yard dash is in the 4.6, 4.7 range. His vertical jumps in that 33, 34 inch range, and his broad is going to be in the 10.4, 10.5 range. So that's the average right now across the board for the linebacker position. Speed, quickness, body control, change of direction. Those are the important things that they're measuring when they're looking at this stuff. And they're watching them go through the underwear Olympics. They want to see how well they're going to be reactive to things. And like I said, the safety position is becoming more and more like the linebacker position because of the skill set that's required to do it. It's just that the linebackers are bigger. The last thing I guess I'll throw out is this upcoming class at the linebacker position, I don't think necessarily has a lot of really top tier talent. This year we saw one guy go in the first round, Jahad Campbell, 31st overall to the Eagles. And the reason that he went 31, it was because of a knee injury. He was most people expected him to come off the board at 20 and in that range, 22. I think the Chargers was the sweet spot. Everyone was kind of expecting him to come off the board. At the running back position in this upcoming class, however, there's some really good players. There's a couple of them at Penn State. I think one of my favorite players in the class to keep an eye on at Penn State would be Nicholas Singleton. He's run for 1,000 yards now twice in 3 years, while he's been splitting a backfield with his teammate Katron Allen, who also he's probably a day 3 prospect. He could slide into day 2. He scored double-digit touchdowns every year that he's played, and he is a hell of a receiver out of the backfield. Last year, brought it from 26 catches to 41. This guy looks like a first-round pick to me. He does everything extremely well. And he can line up as a receiver. He's very capable in pass protection, and he's a bigger guy, 6 foot, 205 pounds. As a running back, versatile slasher, I think, is the best way I would use to describe him. He's absolutely phenomenal to watch, and so I would keep an eye on him. And it's easy to sit here and talk about my guy. I know that a lot of people really like Jaden Ott too, and I'm bringing him up because last year he had 2nd to 3rd round projections. He stayed in school. Now he's back. He's transferred from the University of California to Oklahoma, where he's going to be the starter there. And this guy is another one of these dudes that can kind of do a little bit of everything. Maybe not as strong as a pass protector, but more of that really good route runner, running back out of the backfield, somebody to keep an eye on this year. When we get into, the closer to the season, we get into past summer, and now we're getting into training camps and stuff, be able to spend a lot more time on prospects. But I wanted to take this episode and kind of go over those couple positions. You can go back, check out the running back episode from last year, where we really get into the weeds with some of that stuff. And hopefully you're able to take a few keys away. And one of these days, we'll have to get some film up on here and literally sit there and break down some teach tape. Before now, we're right at the 30-minute mark. Jimmy is probably dying to go watch some hockey. We're almost done on the year. It certainly looks like. So we're going to go ahead and wrap up the Draft Digest show with this. So tune in next week. Emily should be back. So it won't just me be droveling on and on. And hopefully we'll have a little bit more humor again. So for everybody at the Sick Podcast, I'm John Vogel. Jimmy, let's get out of here.
And that's a wrap. Hope you don't miss us too much until next time. Follow the Sick Podcast Draft Digest on YouTube, X, Google Play, and Apple Podcasts.